Welcome to another episode of the Thunderstock Show, a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, and pursuit of property, as the founding fathers would like it to be. This episode is continuing our season of the EOS journey with Jackie Kibler, who is an EOS implementer based outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. Jackie has a rich career in corporate, as well as a fondness for helping entrepreneurs achieving their EOS life. Jackie, thanks for coming on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. So, when you were growing up, did you know that you would eventually be an EOS implementer, or what did you think that you wanted to do?
No, actually, when I was growing up, the last thing I wanted to do was be near entrepreneurs. My father had a music business for around 50 years, and he you have the highs and lows. So like when you say entrepreneur plus music, some of the lows were really low. So the cool thing is when I started working with Vistage and then EOS, I had tools to help those folks that were entrepreneurs. With my dad, obviously, I didn't, but you've got those triple type A personalities. And I wanted to go as far away from entrepreneurship as possible when I was a kid. So I actually went to school for psychology, worked as a suicide counselor, rehab counselor. I worked with the mentally and physically disabled, and then decided I wanted to go into business. Sort of a all here, there, and everywhere type story.
I want to touch on another important thing.
Yeah, I worked for Vistage.
Okay. And that's an interesting. I'm a member of Vistage in the local chapter here with Trusted Advisors.
Nice.
And it's been, I would say, EOS number one for career transformation. Vistage probably number two for me.
Yeah.
So glad to hear that we have a similar shared perspective there. But you are also a lead singer in a rock band?
Yeah. So I talk about my dad having a music business. He was in a band and he was the one that dealt with all the business side of it. Plus, he was a bass player. So I grew up in a very musical household. And when I worked with Vistage, they put together a band, and I was one of the singers. At first, it was called the Rockin' Chair Band, right? Because everyone was with Vistage or was a chair.
Right.
Then all of a sudden that changed a bit. And so we became Vinyl Rock. And I stopped singing with them right before I moved to North Carolina. So I was with them for about 8 years and I loved it. Great way to release endorphins and connect. And I've always, I mean, even in high school, I did plays and things like that. But I love music. I love singing. I love playing in the band. I loved playing in the band. Yeah, huge part of my one of my passions.
Well, I have to ask, are you familiar with the name Sandy?
I recognize the name, but I don't know from where.
Okay, so he was a drummer for Cyndi Lauper, I want to say Joan Jett, a few other bands. He went on tour with Queen. He had some pretty interesting career. I think he had like 53 years as a paid musician. He was on the John Carson show. Yeah, he was on there a couple times while he was a musician as a drummer. And now he's a Vistage speaker. So
oh wait, you know what? One of the chairs actually told me about him because he had, I think he spoke to their group or spoke at the Vistage Executive Summit or Chair World, one of the three.
Yeah. So I got to see his presentation. It was a half-day presentation in March, and it was incredible. The parallels between entrepreneurship and the music business, as much as being in a rock band, you have to have a little bit of rebelliousness in you. I mean, it just goes along with the territory, I have to assume. And he really tied back how it is a business, right? Because he said so few, with such a small percentage of musicians can be what they would call like full-time. Like that's how they earn their living for a long period of time. He did
Right.
it for a lot of years, and he goes, it's really a business. There's management, and there's leadership, and there's sales, and there's marketing, and you have to track your books. Like it's a
That's
business.
why I say with my dad, he had a music business.
Yeah, and you
His
get it.
business, right?
And one of the things that was so interesting to me and it was the skill transfer of being especially a lead singer in a rock band, right? When you're the lead singer, you're kind of looked at as the face. People may think of it as the visionary in an EOS accountability chart, right? Where you're like the face, the big relationships, like the
Yeah.
cover. But stage fright's a real thing. And for every entrepreneur, they have to probably learn pretty quickly that if they're just starting, they have to be on stage, they have to sell, they have to market, they have to be the brand. And I think that it's interesting when a lead singer can get over stage fright, right? Because a lot of people are comfortable with selling Zoom or on the phone or even in person with a one-on-one environment. But to be on stage in front of a crowd is a different type of experience. So, what was that like, and how did you get over any? Did you ever have stage fright? And if so, what was it like?
Well, I'll say a couple things. The first time outside of like doing plays and things like that, I sang professionally was with my father when he and one of his groups was inducted into the Syracuse Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And so I sang with him, and that was probably, I mean, it's one of the joys that, like, if there's a milestone in my brain, that's one of them, just because it was so amazing. And it was in front of a huge auditorium that was jam packed. And I just wanted to do the best I could. So my dad was proud of what I was doing. And interestingly, the song that we did is still on TV in that part of New York every Halloween. And like it's 30 years later, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. But then going fast forwarding to my own band with Vinyl Rock, or the Rockin' Chairs at the time. Oh my God, the first time I went out, I was petrified. And I remember, I can't remember what song it was. I literally, oh, it was the Supremes, Keep You Hanging On. And I forgot the words and I just froze. And
Whoa!
yeah, the lead guitarist comes out and he's like, you got to do something. I'm like, I don't remember the words. He's like, you got to do something anyway. So I just went on to whatever the next verse was that I remembered when it came back. And yeah, that was petrifying. There's other times once you got used to it, like even if I sang the wrong verse, like people hardly knew because they were
Mm.
just so busy dancing and singing, they didn't, it wasn't much of a big deal. And that happened a couple times where I was just into it and I realized I was doing the wrong verse. I looked at the leader of the band. He looks at me and we just bust out laughing. I'm like, well, at least we're keeping them moving.
That is amazing. I think that once you come to terms with what's the worst that could happen, and that
Yeah,
might be one of the things you could identify as worst that could happen. Maybe there's other things, whatever. But like then it takes all the sting out of it, right? Well, we lived, we're still here, show goes on. And I think
exactly.
for a lot of people that maybe aren't where they want to be, my guess is that they just like haven't experienced the worst that could happen and lived through it to tell the tale.
They're afraid. And an unfortunate thing, I'm a high quick start, so I tend to just sometimes jump in, sometimes jumping in without thinking about what the end result would be. That was the end result. To your point, it's like, what's the worst that can happen? And the interesting part of that is, like, I am a public speaker. Actually, for Vistage, I'm a speaker. And so I'm a public speaker. I facilitate for a living, and you got to think the same way. So, those that, and there are lots of folks that are also introverts that do what I do. And, it might take them a little longer to get to a point where they're comfortable enough to move forward without having those nerves. But I'm also a coach for EOS Worldwide. So I have mentees that I work with. Actually, after this podcast, I am launching my last group until February. So I've been with them since November, and they're they're all doing great, and so I'm launching them off. And usually what happens in between the 6 months that I'm with them is they're like, oh my gosh, I don't have this memorized. I'm like, bring your manual, highlight what you want. All you have to do is make it to the next break. That's all you need to do.
Ah.
So that's the way I look at it. And when I'm doing talks to larger groups, I make sure I'm not looking at one person in the face. You're sort of looking at the general audience so that you're not like, as if I were looking only at you and you made a funny face, I'd be like, oh my gosh, what did I just say in my head, which would then mess me up,
Would distract you or get you off track.
totally get me off track.
Oh, that's an interesting hack.
Yeah,
So not looking at people directly in the face,
right.
but looking at the broader audience. And I also think that what you said to make a music analogy is play a concert, your session day, one song at a time. Right?
Yes,
Your job when you're playing a current song is to make it to the next one.
yes,
And so on and so forth. I think that's really helpful to break down what could be a daunting thing. Like, oh, how am I going to do 8 hours and memorize every single thing? You don't have to. You got to do section by section. And to be honest, I think my guess would be is that you've been in EOS for a number of years,
yeah.
but how many years specifically?
6,
6.
yeah.
I'm guessing on year 7, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier than on year 1.
My year one, I started in August of 2019 and lived in LA at that time. So within 6 months, COVID happened. Year one, I was like, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I was petrified for 3 weeks. And then I'm like, okay, you made this decision, put your big girl pants on and make it happen. And so that's what I did. So definitely, unless we go into a depression, my hope is, I hope we don't.
Right.
Yeah, I think year 7 will be fabulous.
That is the right perspective. One thing that you mentioned, I want to bring up first generation American.
Yes.
What is, I'll insert my father side of the family, super American, been here for centuries, long time. Mother's side, she didn't really speak English until like I was, she spoke some English, but it wasn't like, it was like rudimentary. And then I
Yeah.
was growing up and she was kind of learning how to be a native English speaker. So she was French Canadian, so still, not quite United States. And I think there's more stark
Sure.
contrast now than before. But what has it been like experiencing as a first generation American, and how do you think it's been a shaper of your journey?
That's a great question. For me, my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. My dad came over on a boat from Israel, at that time Palestine. And for me, I think the biggest thing that I wanted to do was just and this was sort of ingrained in me, through my dad, especially my dad's side of the family, very German, very regimented. And so I think really I wanted to be able to do what I could do and be successful at what I could be the best at what I can be. But also, what my mom gave me is having my own way of doing it.
Ah,
And for me, that has been the biggest takeaway, because I've got a very strong work ethic. I will do whatever I need to do. Sometimes I overcommit, which, if you know EOS, Mark O'Donnell would say, don't overcommit.
oh
I
yeah.
might have a problem with that. But I want to be able to, I wanted to be able to live the American dream, and I wanted my dad and my grandparents to be proud of what I've accomplished. And I believe that there's something after us. So I believe that my grandparents have seen, my progression, and of course stumbling blocks, but we all have those. So for me, I feel like that is the biggest part of what my journey here has been.
And one of the core themes and reasons why I do this show is to help have conversations like this around the concept of the American dream. I spent a lot of time thinking about it and just seeing what it was like, even from Canada, not so far away, not like anything like, escaping Nazi Germany, anything like that.
Sure.
It's not the same, but I've really seen the difference between people that have what I call an immigrant mentality
Yeah.
versus people that have had maybe since been families since you're the Mayflower, right?
Well, and my husband's a Mayflower baby. So, I
Yeah,
mean, been here forever. When I married him, I was like, yeah, this is my apple pie husband.
which is cool, right? It's just a different perspective, and I love how you mentioned, you had that literature, they call it the manifest destiny, like you'll shape your own path, make the American dream, whatever term you want to call it.
Yeah.
And I really respect and admire that perspective, and it seems like you have big goals and you have big work ethic to match it, and I think that's really important for anyone listening. If you want to do something, you have to ask, what do I have to do in order to become the person that this something will be likely to occur, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't thought about this until now. Like, but I mean, and my husband is amazing. He has got the biggest heart. He is such a supporter. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if he didn't say, hey, I know you can do it. But I mean, the drive that I have is a little different than his, and not in a bad way, because you don't want two people that are the same by any
Mm-mm.
stretch. But it is a different thing. Funny, now it's since a totally different topic. When he first met my family and he came to like lunch or dinner or whatever it was, and the way we communicate is a little bit louder and a little bit more passionate than perhaps his family, where maybe there wasn't a lot of communication going back and forth. He was like, after we left, he was like, why were you guys screaming at each other? I looked at him, I'm like, what are you talking about? There's no screaming. We were talking, we were communicating. Just
This is normal.
exactly, it's normal.
So one of the things that to tie back, you have a very strong family purpose, mission, core value with your family. And you mentioned that, a lot of people can relate to, having a family is almost like a business partnership. There are some similarities. Not only do opposites attract, but in a business environment, if you have two visionaries or two integrators, it's like a magnetic polarity.
Yes.
How do you think family and the dynamic of having the husband that is different but in positive complementary fashion, right, where it makes sense, how do you think that's helped support your business and your career, right? Because you have a good model of which
Yeah.
to base the career off of with the personal life.
So, I'm probably going to take you back further than you want to go. I probably wouldn't be a mother if I didn't marry my husband. And my best friend, and she's still an amazingly close friend of mine, when I was pregnant with my first son, she's like, the only reason you can have this child is because of who you're married to. And at first I'm like, whatever. But she's probably right.
Yeah.
And as I was growing through Dun and Bradstreet, I was working a lot, entertaining a lot. So my husband, Rich, had to be with my older son. At that time, so Brandon was born in 92. There was still a lot of stereotypes where even if we put down my cell phone, or sorry, my husband's cell phone or whatever phone number, work number, they would still call me. And like
In
there was
the 90s.
yeah, in the 90s, even in the beginning of the 2000s. And so there was one time my son like broke his arm or something like that. And I was in Phoenix doing a workshop for like a D&B office. And they called that D&B office. How they got that number, I will never know. But I was like, my husband is the one who is the one you're supposed to be reaching. So we've always had this sort of, I wouldn't call it a switch. It's just we share responsibilities. But I mean, when I was with Vistage and a lot of the chairs were like, you need to try something on your own. And I was like, yeah, yeah, sure, whatever.
Sure.
And I said that probably for about, I don't know, 8 months. My husband is a lot more subdued than I am. I'm very, hello. And he's sort of like that calming force. So he's not the motivator. But there was one time I was coming back from whatever I was doing work wise, and we were in California, and he was in the backyard with the fire pit going, 2 glasses of wine, and he cheered me and persuaded me for 2 hours. And finally I was like, okay, I'll do it. And that was I wouldn't be an implementer if it weren't for that. He has not been a cheerleader since then, nor before then. But that day, I mean, he was like, I know you can do it. I can support you if this doesn't work. I mean, it was,
Talk about someone that can help you identify right person, right seat
yeah.
within an accountability chart. I know I'm making EOS tools into your story,
No, but you're not
but
wrong.
sometimes if you don't have someone that can nudge you and say, hey, maybe this is like, I know who you are. I know what you're capable of. I have an outside perspective. I know EOS loves to say you can't read the label from inside the bottle. I love that.
Yeah.
He helped you read the label
Yeah. Yeah. I think
with with a bottle of wine. Look at that,
which is helpful.
which is helpful. A little bit of in EOS session rooms, they'll say, hey, what's the one thing? You start, stop, or continue.
Yes.
You got to, the wine might have taken the place with the compliment versus the start, stop. Maybe, hey, nothing's a better compliment than a nice glass of wine, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you've mentioned about being really across the country, from New York to you're in LA, now you're in Charlotte.
Yeah.
What spurred the transition from your career in the West Coast? I think you said in 2019 you were in the West Coast, and now you're in
Yes.
Charlotte. How did that physical journey reflect with your career journey and personal journey?
Well, so I actually moved to Charlotte in April of last year.
Okay.
So I've been, although I still have clients on the West Coast, I am trying to rebuild my brand in Charlotte. So I've got, and the or the East and the East Coast, right? So I've got clients up and down the East Coast as well. But the reason that I moved, and you actually talked about this when you were talking about family. My mom got sick in June of 23, and she tried dying on us 3 times between the time of June of 23 and we'll say June of 24 ish. And so, like, I talk to my parents every day, and I couldn't get home. It's very difficult to get to Syracuse. Well, it's difficult to get to Syracuse from anywhere as you think about that from where you live, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. So you've got to have red eyes or whatever, but it just took so long. And when my sister called me and told me how scared she was, I looked at my husband. We're at that same place, probably having wine, and I was like, I have to go. I'm like, I have to go. And it's been Rich is a cardiac surgical nurse, so that's what he does here. And
Yeah.
for me, it's just transitioning clients. But I can tell you, since we've been in Charlotte, I've been home just in the past year, probably 3 times as much as I did over a 2 or 3 year period.
Oh, that's pretty
Right.
cool.
So it's awesome. We're going there again in July. Sorry. Yeah. The end of July to celebrate my mom's 80th birthday. And I didn't think, like, we were there for Mother's Day, and I wrote her this card, and just, a heartfelt card, and I'm like, I'm so happy. I didn't think you'd be here. So it's a gift. And you have to take advantage of every gift that you get. And I mean, it's just it's a phenomenal opportunity. And I wouldn't change anything for the world.
You can always get another position in the healthcare field. You can always get a different client in different location, but you only get one mother.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. I think what that also highlights is that if you are serious about living an EOS life, you can't sacrifice that which is most important for that which is most immediate,
Right.
right? Like, oh, I'm building a business and this and that, but it's like, what worth is the business if you miss out on that which is most important to you, the people you care
Yeah.
about the most?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have one family. That's it. That's it. And yeah, for me, I zero regrets. Plus, my sister knows that I'm there for her when she needs me, and that is also really important. I will never move back to Syracuse, New York, but Charlotte has direct flights that are like an hour and a half, and I can go to any city around there if I can't get to Syracuse fast enough. Because, like we were talking about before we started, rent a car and drive. You're good.
There you go. Quick start,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Which talking about Colby, as someone who's also a quick start and I have a high fact finder, which is sometimes feels like they're contradictory, but like for what I do, it somehow make it work. How has the assessments of Colby and other types of those things to help along the line of topic of like self-awareness and knowing that, you're doing the right thing, this is what you're meant to do. Like how have those tools helped you and how do you use them to help other entrepreneurs?
So, first, you and I are similar. I'm a 6'5", 8'3", right? So I always tell people I'm in constant battle with myself, right? Sort of a high fact finder and then high quick start. For me, it really helped me to understand like why I do what I do. It's sort of just an innate thing. And because I was a psychology major, I got certified in Colby, not to sell it, but so that I could dig deep with my clients with it that
Mm,
wanted to, or I could explain questions or answers, explain answers to questions for them. And it's fascinating. They've got, you get your regular Colby, but then I get a Teams report, and that Teams report really shows where you've got a lot of something and where you might have gaps in something, which also is amazing as I've done a lot with like engineering firms, and then I've done a lot with sales driven organizations. So, engineers almost all high quick start, like real estate, commercial real estate. It's like you need someone with more of a fact finder or follow through, right? So that's how I've used them. I got certified only to help my clients, not to sell it, and so
that's
um,
really interesting. So I'll share with you a family story.
please,
My grandfather is 95, and we're planning on doing a family reunion pretty soon because who knows? Toughest SOB that I know. I'm very grateful to be related to him. Naval Academy. Uh, Long story short, got his master's, MBA, but like his undergrad engineering. So engineering for years and years and years and years, like big engineer. And then when he finished his military career and kind of settled down, like entrepreneurship, so like president of companies, general manager of companies, like obviously the MBA route, but then the family business. So I would call my grandfather and father entrepreneurs because they were broker of records, started a commercial real estate firm. So engineer and commercial real estate. I would guess my grandfather's a 10 fact finder.
yeah,
Like he's just like you can't pry his library out of his hands, like his notes. Like it's just he's got so many books. Like half the books I have are either directly from him or genesis of that. And I never thought of engineering and commercial real estate as being like it from that Colby perspective, but it kind of it hits
yeah.
home.
I usually the anyone in like commercial real estate that I know, they're such high quick starts, but I can see where the fact finder comes into play, right? Because there's all of the analytics that go with that. And so like the ones that I worked with, they had somebody who did that for them, and then they just took it and ran with it.
Yeah, and my dad's probably a 10 quick start. So that would be the balancing of the duo where it made sense.
There you go.
But speaking of family business, you have a family of entrepreneurs. Like, so what was it like with your parents? I know you said your father in the rock band. Did your mother support that? Did she have her own business? Like, what was it like? Because I want to touch back. We didn't really dig deep into. You were rebellious against entrepreneurship at
Oh God,
first, in the
yes.
verse. Then you ended up embracing potentially your genetic makeup, your DNA, your GWC of entrepreneurship
Yeah.
later. So, like, what was it like growing up in the family for you of entrepreneurship?
Well, so my grandparents had, there's a lot of, I mean, many people who were immigrants that I know, including like my cousin who's got a technology company in New York, and my grandparents, when they came over, they had their house was a boarding house. They had a farm. They lots of livestock, sold a lot of that. My dad was in the music business. My mom, pretty much stayed home with us. I mean, she volunteered at. She was always there. I mean, she like volunteered for like when I wanted to do Girl Scouts, and she did all that. And then when I went to high school, she was a teacher's assistant at my high school, which had its advantages and disadvantages. So, yeah, so and then when I went to college, she started working at a place called ARC, which is Association for Retarded Citizens. And so that was where my summer jobs were in the beginning. So I just kind of followed wherever she was, which was sort of cool.
So that might have influenced your early
Psych.
stages with
Yeah.
psychology and the
Yeah.
mental health.
Very
That's really
much.
cool. Oh, well, thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
Switching gears a little bit, I want to ask you about the inflection point of how. So, how did you discover EOS? What was it like? At what stage in your journey did you say, "All right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start implementing EOS"? Like we didn't really talk about that. I want to know because it's a unique
Yeah.
story.
So when I was working at Vistage, I was what's called a regional executive. So I had California, Nevada were my areas where was working with around 100 Vistage chairs, helping them with their practice, build relationships, partnerships, stuff like that. And one of the chairs, like there was some weird. I lived in LA. Vistage is based in San Diego, so I was remote. But and you would hear things about the roles that I was in going away. I was told you don't have to worry about it. You've done so well, but the role most likely will be going away. So I'm like, all right, what do I do? And all the chairs, they're just like, oh my gosh, you have to do something. One of the chairs brought me the book Traction, and that's how I found EOS. I mean, I did have implementers that were very, very early on. Sorry about that. That were very, very early on calling me because they knew I was sort of the key to the Vistage chairs. But at that time, Vistage thought that EOS was a competitor versus a something that would work very well. They align well, right, side by side.
Yeah, I never thought of those two as competitors
It
until you
was
mentioned
it
it.
was
That's interesting.
it was a while ago. So when I read the book, I got what the chairs were talking about. It's like we worked with the CEO help. It's all about professional development. About me as a leader, not necessarily about how to grow or build an infrastructure to grow an organization.
Sure.
Different thing. And so the reason that I decided to go into EOS is I knew I wanted to do something. I actually eventually ended up leaving Vistage and going and working for about a heartbeat as the COO or head of sales service and operations for a networking organization called Provisors, which is sort of it's
I'm in provisors too.
there you go. So I was there for less than a year.
Okay.
We had visionary integrator issues. And so I left within a year. And it was during that year that like I was talking to implementers. I was looking at other things. I knew that I wanted to do something on my own because I'm like, if I just find another job that it doesn't make my soul fill up,
Right.
you're just going to end up leaving. And
It'll
so
be repeating the same feeling.
exactly.
You don't want to go from one step to the next that's the same feels like the same step, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So after I spoke with two of the folks that I know, like, and trust that did it, I decided to become an implementer.
No like trust refer. There you go.
Exactly. Funny, when it got out that I was going to do EOS, there was a guy in LA who did something called sales acceleration. So you're a fractional CMO.
Hmm.
Sales accelerations are fractional CROs or fractional heads of sales.
Yep.
And because I'd led so many sales organizations, what they're like, no, don't do EOS. You need to do this. And I'm like, I want to do something that helps the entire organization, not just wrapped around, again, doing the same thing that I've done.
Right.
So I went to boot camp in August of 2019. I knew that I wanted to do it, so I actually signed my agreement with them in April 2019. But there's boot camp that you have to pay for, and I didn't have that
Yeah.
additional funding to go into their May class. So I knew I would have it by August. And so that's sort of what I did. And I really haven't looked back since. You have your moments of, I call it bipolar days, right? Because you have your highs and lows.
Yeah.
And, there have been times when it's like, am I doing the right thing? But then something happens with a client, you know, I've gotten things from clients that are just, they don't realize how much it means to me when they say the things that they say about how EOS has helped them. And I mean, to give you a feel, I know I shared with you before that well, actually, maybe I didn't. I've transitioned several clients in LA to other implementers. One of them, I had speak with five other implementers, and she wouldn't go. And so I had a conversation with her, and I actually, I'm like, all right, we'll stay. And so I'm still working with them. And I guess like when I was with them last week, I was like, I guess it's just because we fit like family.
Mm.
So just like you, before we started rolling, we're talking about how you pick your clients. Like, I feel like people that use me probably wouldn't want other people because I am not as straight laced as other people. You can
Sure.
probably tell by my personality, even on this, that, I take what I do very seriously, but I have fun with everything that I'm doing.
And that's an important distinction, is taking what you do seriously, but not taking yourself seriously. Like, what you do is not necessarily who you are. Who
Yeah,
you are can be identified as, I'm a great daughter, I'm a great wife, I'm a great mom, I'm a great friend. Like, there's so many more things just being, I'm a great business owner.
right, right, exactly. And one of my clients in Charlotte, they're actually in marketing, and they interviewed, I don't even know how many implementers here, and about a year into it, she was like, I interviewed all these people, and she's like, they were very buttoned up, and I looked at her, I'm like, so am I just a slob or just too casual? It's just like, it just fits. So that's the beauty of implementers. I mean, the people that you're going to be most successful with are people that you feel that you can have an impact on and they trust you to do it.
Where open and honest isn't a hurdle, it's
Right.
just a natural fit, right? Because it's, I mean, I'm speaking the language, but like, as much as it's important for a leadership team to be open and honest with one another, if they don't feel comfortable that they can be who they really are in front of you as an implementer, it's probably not a great fit for either.
Right.
And I love that you mentioned that you tried to introduce clients to other implementers, and some have been resistant to it because they really want to work with you. I think one of my tertiary goals of doing this series of interviews and podcasts is to help people to identify who's the right implementer for them.
Yeah.
Not necessarily selling EOS as a concept, but like further down, like, hey, there's plenty of options out there, and I promise you'll find the right one for you.
Absolutely. Well, there's 832 of us. So,
And growing.
and growing and growing. Yeah, we just had a group a couple weeks ago that went through boot camp. So no, you're totally right. You're totally right.
Well, it's interesting to hear about your involvement in different organizations that I'm very familiar with as Provisors and with Vistage, and how they kind of all fit together in your journey. That is quite a wild ride, and I'm glad that you've committed to saying, no, this is, you might perceive this as a competitor, I think of it as a totally different way to serve, and I love that you had that commitment and stuck with it. And I agree with you. I think they're all totally different ways to serve. I also admire, someone told you should do sales acceleration, you're like, I'm going to think for myself and do this path, right?
Yes.
Like, it's really admirable, right? Because I think if I could say I had any regrets, it would be not listening to myself sooner. That would be one for me to share with you. So, not that you have any regrets, right? Like, I'm not trying to go on it's Friday. We're not trying to give you a downer here, but like, what are some things that if you could talk to your 8-year-old self and maybe your 80-year-old self, like where you're at today, like
Yeah.
what would you tell them?
Well, for my younger self, I would love to just have more faith in what your thoughts are and don't be like, I think that like the way I raised my kids and the way I was raised was very different.
Hmm.
Like my mom, she told me that like hers was be seen, not heard. For me, my opinion, I really was very chameleonic, even through corporate, of who I was. I don't know how, it wasn't until Vistage that people are like, you need to be your authentic self. I haven't been as happy since. So trust your judgment, do what's right. You don't have to feel like you fit in all the time. Be who you are and who you are meant to be, and live that life. And for my 80-year-old self, I just want to make sure that I am continuing down the path where I still have purpose and I want to stay active and travel and and do what you can do as long as you can do it. So with my father, who either had two jobs, had the band, was a teacher, blah blah blah, once he finally stopped working, it was like all that triple A personality didn't really know where, like, he'd just spin. And so, because I feel like I have some of that energy, like, I've got friends that are in their late 70s, early 80s, and they could probably outrun me. And I just find that amazing. And so, I want to be that. That's what I want.
Yeah, age
And
is but a number, right?
yeah,
Age is but a
yeah.
number. I told you about my 95-year-old grandfather earlier. He only let his license go into escrow for commercial real estate at 92.
Oh my
And at 94, he's like, maybe I should get it back. And he goes, well, most of my contacts are dead. But it's the same kind of mentality. I think the reason he's still a relatively healthy 95-year-old is because he's always like active, whether it's mentally or physically, whatnot. Physically, not so much, but mentally, absolutely. And I think there's a lesson to be learned in that aspiration that you have when you get to be, at that later stage. It's like,
Yeah,
how do you stay active and squeeze all the juice out of what time you have on earth? Because you only get one shot at it.
exactly. Exactly.
Well, this is going to be a fun part. I told you there was a secret question for you, and
Secret one,
it
yes.
is just for you. And there was no prior, I promise there's no magic trick to how this question was selected.
Okay.
Although I do find the more episodes I do, the more there's no coincidence.
Okay.
The last guest has this question for you, Jackie, which is, who would you have to be to create your life of play, light, fun, and peace?
Who would I have to be to create my life of light, love, and peace?
Play, light, fun, and peace. And love. That counts too.
Who would I have to be? Most people believe that I kind of do what I'm going to do when I'm going to do it, right? So without financial, anything, like if money weren't an option, I would still want to be me.
I knew you were going to say that because you're already working towards the answer to that question, which is hilarious. You've got to be yourself, right?
Yes, yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
You answered it.
I mean, I try to take, when I see something that I admire about people, I do swipe and adapt. So I'm always ever evolving and growing, personally, professionally, inside, outside, health, whatever. So yeah, no, that's what I would want.
Love that. Now, on the flip side of that coin, what question do you have for the next guest? And I promise I won't tell you who it is.
You promise you won't tell me? There's a secret again. If you had one thing that you would change about where you've been to help where you want to be in the future, what would that be and why? If you had one thing that you would want to change in your past that you would do, what you could change that you've done in your past that would also help your future, what would that be? I can tell you what mine is.
Please do.
So, because that might help you ask the question better than I did. So, the one thing that I did in high school, like I was, well, in elementary school, I was in gifted and talented. And then because of the people I hung out with, I found out being smart was stupid. So, I decided, I mean, I remember in seventh grade getting a grade of 25 on a quiz. 25. And I already told you my dad and my dad's family were very regimented, so I was grounded, I think, from seventh grade until now. And I feel like if I had just focused on, like, still had fun with people, but focused on school, I probably would have gotten into a better college, which would have had more opportunities for after college. You know what I mean? So, like, my youngest son went to Syracuse University. The alumni association is huge there. So he was able to talk to a lot of people about what he wanted to get into, which I think gave him a leg up versus someone like myself and my husband that went to Oswego State, and which Oswego is a good school. I have nothing, I love being an alumni there, but I the opportunities, especially for psych majors, weren't plentiful. I actually had to go out and really hunt for a business opportunity that would bring somebody in that was a psych major, right? So that's what I would do differently, because I
Hmm.
think it would have helped me quicker. I mean, I'm sure I would have wound up in the same place outside of my husband, right? Because I met
Right.
him in college. But I just think it gives you a leg up if you do well, get yourself set up, and then, still have fun, but focus on the things that you need to focus on,
Very
which for
cool.
me would have been school.
Hmm. Well, Jackie, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know your story, your journey, you personally much better, and sharing these stories that I think if anyone listening, you take a couple of the lessons, the nuggets, you can take it and run with it and live more of your most authentic EOS life. So thank you for that. It's been a pleasure. And for everyone listening, I don't run ads in the show. Don't plan to. My only ask is if you found this conversation to be enlightening or helpful, share it with a friend. Jackie, thank you. Everyone, be well.
Thank you so much.